All right, so this is some breaking inputs where the Israeli Prime Minister has gone in front of his people in his address to the nation that he gave out in Hebrew. This is what the Israeli Prime Minister is claiming, that the joint American and Israeli attacks are crushing Iran and the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Netanyahu made a televised address to the nation, which came as Israel announced that it had launched a fresh wave of attacks on Tehran, pressing ahead with its campaign against Iran on the 13th day. The attacks at Beirut also have continued as Israel is threatening to seize Lebanon if Hezbollah does not stop the attacks. Netanyahu also commented on Iran's new leader Mujtaba Khamenei, saying that he can't show his face in the public. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Mr. Ömer Özkızılçık, who's a strategic and a defense analyst. He's joining us live from Ankara in Turkey. Mr. Özkızılçık, thank you very much indeed for taking time out and speaking to us here in WION. Now, this is day 13 of the war. At this moment, the Strait of Hormuz is shut. The American military bases in the GCC nations have come under some serious attack, and the Americans are having to fly their long-range strategic bombers from British air bases. In your assessment, how do you think the war is going for either side?
I mean, when we look at this war from a tactical perspective, it's clearly that the United States of America and Israel have the escalation dominance here. But if we look at this from a strategic perspective, it looks quite different. The absence of a clear strategic goal and a clear political goal by the United States of America and Israel is actually the major component that is facilitating Iran to gain the upper hand or to pressure the United States of America. So what we are seeing is that the Iranian regime is extending fire to the region, and the United States of America does not have a real answer. They are bombing, they're attacking the Iranians, they're decimating their capabilities, but there is no strategic shift. So this can go on for quite some time, actually. And it doesn't look like that the United States of America has the longer breath here. So we have to see how it will evolve. But so far, the superiority in capability of the United States of America is being diminished by the lack of strategic vision by the Trump administration.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that the Americans have the potential for escalation. But the point is, the Iranians are also hitting the Americans not just militarily, but they're also causing some economic pain for the Americans within the American mainland. With the gas and oil and gas supplies not flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, inflation is going up in America. There is this financial markets which are looking very jittery. You know, how much do you think Donald Trump is willing to risk for himself, you know, the anger of the American public because of the rising gas prices, to go deep into this war?
I mean, this is one of the major aspects of the Iranian strategy, to not fight this war on the terms dictated by the United States of America, but to define the terms by themselves. And Iran is actually quite successful in doing that. And we have seen so far that Donald Trump has come up with very different statements which indicate that he is thinking about an off-ramp, that he is thinking how he can end this war. On one side, and on the side, he is signaling that he has the upper hand, he will annihilate the Iranians. But as I said, there is no strategic goal. And this economic pressure is the Achilles heel of the United States of America, because everyone in the United States of America who is following this war has a major question. Was it worth? Is this a war of the Americans, or is this a war Israel dragged the American state into? And with time passing, the opinion in the United States of America is degrading towards this war, and it will become more and more difficult for Trump to maintain his support base for this war and to maintain his position, especially considering that towards the end of this year, there are midterm elections in the United States of America, which are quite important. So Trump and the Republicans may lose not only the House of Representatives, but maybe due to this war, they are also potentially going to lose the US Senate, which would severely weaken the Trump administration.
Right, you raised an important point, whether is this war an American war or is this an Israeli war? What is clear is that Netanyahu seems to have had a pretty big role in pushing Donald Trump to initiate this war. Now, Netanyahu a little while back addressed his nation in Hebrew. He said that the Israelis are winning this war. But there's also a complete media blackout to show as to what is happening in this moment inside of Israel with respect to the Iranian missile strikes. In your assessment, how much of this air defense capability is still left with the Israelis, and how far can the Israelis continue to remain in this war?
First of all, the Israelis are very keen to declare victory. They have declared victory against the Palestinian Liberation Organization decades ago, but in the end they have to come to terms with them. They have declared victory against Hamas, but we know Hamas is still there. In 2006, they have declared victory against Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is still there. And we see Hezbollah rocket attacks against northern parts of Israel. So this is one part. The second part is regarding the ballistic missiles. We have to differentiate between the 12-day war and the current war. In the current war, the Iranian strategy is quite different than the 12-day war, where Iran had a huge barrage of missiles and attacks conducted in a single time, and in which they tried to conduct as much damage towards Israel as possible. But this time, the Iranians have a strategy to play the longer game, to continuously and systematically attack the Israeli heartland and to continue to conduct these attacks on a certain level of intensity. So therefore, so far, the level of destruction appear, at least what we can see from open sources, to be less than the destruction in the 12-day war. But the question is, this continuous attack by Iran is putting a huge pressure on the Israeli defense capabilities, on the Israeli air defense stockpiles, and moreover on the Israeli society. Because yes, it's possible for 2 weeks into a shelter, but is the Israeli society ready to go into the shelter for 2 months? And it's apparent that this is the Iranian strategy, to drag this war out as long as that the United States of America and Israel need to come to the negotiation table.
That's interesting. Now, one of the ideas that was floated by the American military establishment is to possibly send in some ground forces, if at all possible, or they've also been talking with the Kurds to see if the Kurds would be willing to stage any kind of a military pressure from the north into the Iranian territory. Do you think the Kurds would be willing to play ball with the Americans, considering the number of times the Americans have used the Kurds and then have very quietly dropped them?
Always when I hear the term "the Kurds," I have to think about the reality of the Kurds, because the Kurds are not a monolithic ethnic group. They have a huge disagreements, huge fragmentation within themselves. And very interestingly, there is no area in the Middle East where the Kurds are more divided than inside Iran. Because in Syria, in Iraq, in Turkey, the Kurds are all Sunni Kurds. But in Iran, we have Shia Kurds in Kermanshah and Sunni Kurds in Mahabad, and they are hostile against each other. And then you have the linguistic differences. But to come to your question about the United States of America using these Kurdish groups against the Iranian regime, this idea was being floated around, but it's now dead, even before it began. Why? Because all of the Kurdish groups, except some minor, smaller ones, have rejected this idea. The Iraqi Kurdistan regional government has rejected this idea to support this. The PKK with its Syrian and its Iranian branch and Turkish branch has rejected to become arms for hire for the United States of America, to become pawns, because they understand that for the first time in a long era, that depending on a foreign external actor is not the way forward. And this is actually something that gives me very much hope that maybe this time the PKK and other Kurdish organizations, and the PKK most importantly, as it's using terrorist methods and is a designated terrorist organization, that they understand that they have to come to terms with their neighbors, with their brothers in the region, with the Turks, with the Arabs, rather than to rely on Israel and the United States of America. So the offer from the Americans was rejected by quite a bit hope for the overall future of Syria, Iraq, and Turkey.
Interesting. Now, we've been hearing from the Iranian leadership. Mujtaba Khamenei has in fact given out his very first statement, and he's made it abundantly clear that the American military bases in the region should shut shop and the Americans should militarily go out of the Gulf region altogether. This is something that had been said by Masoud Pezeshkian as well. Now, looking as to how this war is going, do you think Donald Trump would be willing to even look at the possibility of losing the American military bases in the region to strike peace with Iran?
I mean, we have to be clear. I believe that the Iranian statements are statements that are being done during the war, so in a war atmosphere and a war environment. When and if the sides come to negotiation table, I believe that a ceasefire will be much easier to reach, and I believe the very strong positions and the hardline positions will moderate at the negotiation table, especially for an immediate ceasefire. But that being said, I don't believe that it is Iran that will cause America the problem regarding its American bases in the region. I believe the Gulf and the Arab states will be the ones who will question the role and impact of American bases in the region. So the Gulf states and Arab states, they depended on the United States of America for the security. They invited the US to establish bases so that they are being protected from Iranian attacks and that they are protected from any other outside attack. But now, looking at the reality on the ground, we see that the Arab states were actually quite successful in negotiating a ceasefire and normalization with Iran, and that they managed to establish a relationship with Iran in which Iran was not going to attack them. But it was the US that triggered the Iranian attacks. It was the US that decided to put the Arab states into the front line by supporting the Israeli political ambitions and the Israeli national interests. So it looks like the indirect political aspirations of Israel have overweight the security and stability of Arab states. So now, once this war is over, these Gulf and Arab states will have a huge question in front of them. Will they continue to host American bases as their sole security guarantee, or will they question the role of the US as not a security provider, but as a destabilizing factor? If it's the second, then we may see increasing pressure from the Arab states against the US to pull out from the region. So it will not be Iran that will push the US, it will be the Arab states and Gulf states if they decide that the US military presence is destabilizing, not a security provider.
I think that, of course, is a question, the answer for which the Arab states will find at the end of this war. They've already found out the answer to it. It remains to be seen as to what the Arab states will have to say to their partner, the United States of America. We're completely out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Oscar Zilchek, for joining us from Ankara and getting us that perspective there.